I'm Winnie Annan-Forson. I currently work at Barclays, looking after the diversity and inclusion agenda for UK, Europe and Middle East. I'm a vice president here, which might not mean anything to anyone in different organizations because we have different systems. But essentially what that means is that a big part of my role is shaping the strategic agenda, really leaning into our stakeholders, both internally and externally to the organization. So inside Barclays and outside Barclays, and how we represent ourselves as a company that really likes to hire diverse talent, make sure that they're happy to work here, and make sure that we support their career trajectories as best as possible. So the question I often get is, how did you get into working in diversity and inclusion, and how did you start working for a bank? So I'll take you back quite a few years. I actually grew up in Ghana in West Africa, and many of you who will know about Ghana, it's a great place to be, a very sunny climate, so I always recommend it for a holiday. But the reason that it's a very pivotal part of my career journey is that I moved to England at the age of 15, and the Ghanaian education system was very different to the education system here in the UK. So it was very academic there, lots of leaning into subjects like science, maths, basically most of the STEM subjects. And I guess that really gave me a big grounding into that academic focus. But what was really also good about the education system there is there was a huge leaning towards preparation for a lot of, I guess, professional roles. So if any of you are from an African background, it was very normal for our parents to say, you need to work as a doctor or as a lawyer or as a, something kind of very professional. So in theory, that's where a lot of my grounding started from. But I think what's been great about moving to England is that the education system here really leaned towards focusing on broader thinking, analysis, how to build more of a creative mindset. And I actually think that that's been really great for me because it's enabled me to nurture both parts of those. And I'll probably talk about that a little bit more as I talk about my career journey. So fast forward to kind of 2011, I graduated from the University of Manchester, where I studied business management with leisure and tourism. A lot of people might think that that was a very random choice, leisure and tourism, if I work in financial services. But I think the biggest lesson there is if you wanted to work in financial services, you could probably take most degrees and most qualifications into that world. So that's probably the first tip that I would share. But the other reason I chose the leisure and tourism business degree is that you got to have work experience every single year of that degree. So I did 3 years in study, but I spent 2 weeks in the first year doing work experience, 4 weeks in the second year doing work experience, and then 10 weeks in the final year doing work experience, where I got to then write my dissertation. So that was leaning in for me. Like I said before, I come from a very academic background, but I really wanted to grow that work experience very early. I was chomping at the bits to start working. So that degree suited me very well. And it was in that degree that I realized that I really loved all of the kind of HR oriented modules. And I chose after university to go into the HR world. I actually chose financial services at that time because it paid more. And I actually think that's not always the case anymore. There's some really great industries that are now looking at attracting great talent, and the level playing field is now more even and level. But before, it was very much leaning towards banking. And as someone from a lower socioeconomic background, that was a huge driver for me. Working wasn't just about pursuing my passions or building a career. It was also about being able to change generational patterns and be able to support my family more financially. And actually, that's why I chose it. And I say that to say that your motivations for working in financial services might be different, but actually I've loved working in this area, and Barclays has really supported me in my ambitions. And I'm really, really glad I got the opportunity to work here. Now, my career at Barclays has been very varied. So like I mentioned before, I chose to go into human resources because I liked working with people. And if anybody knows much about working in HR is very important for leaning into passion for people. But I think what it also does is really helps you to build a strategic lens on how you represent an organization. And I actually started out in learning and development. So I was very passionate about teaching people, and I actually thought I would be a teacher at one point in my career. But working in learning and development enabled me to design training for the professionals that worked at Barclays. I did that for 3 years, really enjoyed it, but I was ready for a next step. And actually, my business at that point went through a big change, and ended up working with a data and analytics team within the broader learning function. I realized very quickly that whilst I was okay with data and analytics, it wasn't where I was going to spend the rest of my career. So at that point, I moved into HR business partnering. And for those who don't know much about HR business partnering, essentially you are linked to a part of the business. So I had 600 global clients across our operations functions. And essentially I helped them with all of their people related issues. So it might be anything from how do we recognize our teams? How do we think about where our teams are based and how do we support them in the locations they're based in? How do we hire the right talent? How do we engage the right talent? And how do we make sure we're listening to their feedback and meeting their needs? And that was great. Like I said before, I was very passionate about people. So I really enjoyed doing that role. And I loved the partnership focus, working with the business. But when I was doing that, I did that for about 3 years. And I realized that understanding the business was so important for being able to build credibility as a HR professional. And round about that time, I had the perfect opportunity to go and work in the business as a banker, running a banking team of 190 individuals over 14 locations. It was a very big change for me. At that point, I hadn't worked as an actual banker at any point in my career. And what I'll do later on is, just before I finish off, I'll share my kind of top 5 career tips. But you will see that that pivotal time was probably one of the biggest points in my career, where I learned to be a leader. I learned to understand people and their drivers for working more. I learned to understand our risk and control landscape. What are the rules that the business is working to? So in financial services, it's heavily regulated. And what that means is that we have financial conduct authorities and organizations that govern how banks operate. So I learned to understand a lot more about what that means for the bank and how it runs. And that was a very great experience. And I probably did that for about 2.5 years. And in the wake of what happened with George Floyd, what I haven't mentioned so far is that alongside all of the work I was doing, I saw a big gap in the business for being able to attract people who were younger at that point, like me. I'm not so young anymore, unfortunately. But at that time, I created a network for people who were young. And that's where my early work with diversity and inclusion began. But then with the wake of what happened with George Floyd and his unfortunate murder, and that's putting that in the most palatable way possible, but it was obviously a very horrendous event. I really sat down and thought about, as a leader, what could I do to drive positive change where I was? And that's where I started a diversity and inclusion working group in my wider region of 2,000 colleagues. And through the work I was doing there, I was approached to lead the agenda for Barclays UK, which is one of the 3 divisions at Barclays, where I was driving the diversity and inclusion agenda for 24,000 people. I did that for a year before the opportunity came up to do it in the capacity that I'm doing it now, which is for all of our colleagues within our UK, Europe and Middle Eastern regions. So that's quite a varied career, but as you can hear, very people from, sorry, I think I lost, apart from the time that I worked in the banking field. And I guess with that in mind, I'll share my top 5 tips on my career journey and what I've learned alongside that journey so far. So the first thing I would say is, as students looking at your career in the future, it's important to think about your strengths, lean into your strengths, and also grow your transferable skills. So that looks like things like how to build relationships, for example, how to be creative, how to problem solve. Those are all very crucial and important skills that will stand you in good stead in your career. And also say yes to new opportunities. As you've seen, my career has been very, very mixed, but a lot of that has been through the opportunity to just say yes to something new. So that's definitely an important thread. I would also say be curious, ask a lot of questions. I think sometimes we're very worried about what we know and what we don't know, but actually don't worry about asking questions. It doesn't make you silly. It actually gives you the opportunity to learn something new. I would also say be entrepreneurial. So even though a lot of you are joining this session from a STEM focus, actually a massive part of science, technology, engineering, and maths is about being entrepreneurial. It's about coming up with new ideas and ways to solve problems. How can you lean into that skill set within an organization and outside of an organization to solve problems? The last two tips I would share is one, build a board of directors. And what I mean by that is, as individuals, no man is an island, and you need to build a network of people around you to help you along the way. It's very difficult to progress in your career without support. And so far, that will include your friends, your teachers, people within your academic area, but also think about your family and how they can support you. Finding mentors, for example, connecting with people on LinkedIn and learning from their career journeys. And if anyone is on LinkedIn, please feel free to follow my journey by searching Winnie Annan-Forson or asking any questions via there if helpful. But really creating a network around you to support you on that journey is very important. Getting work experience, and whenever you go on work experience, connect with the people you meet on LinkedIn, because it's really important to stay connected to them as your career grows and evolves. And then the final thing is linked to that, which is networking. And actually network with your friends. You might think that your friends are just your friends in school or on the playground, but a lot of my friends are now doing amazing things, and I have the opportunity to work with them in a professional way. And you don't think about that when you're younger. So don't just see your friends as your friends. Think about them as really influential, phenomenal future leaders that you'll be able to use as your professional network moving forward. So hopefully that's given you some insight into my career journey and also the 5 top tips that I'd like to share with you. I wish you all the best with your career journeys, and I look forward to supporting with any questions later on. The answer is no. Like I said before, I didn't have a banking kind of degree. I didn't have banking experience before. So the answer is no. I would say build more on your transferable skills and think about all of the jobs that are being advertised and what skills you have that you can utilize to get your foot in the door. And then to the point about being curious, you can then build on your skills, especially the technical skills, by learning from people in your team or going on additional courses to upskill yourself. But no, there are so many different types of roles in banking. You definitely don't need to have a banking or a maths degree, or even maths interest. Like I said before, I didn't really like data and analytics. I can do it, but I don't love it. So you don't need to. Oh, that's a very controversial question. I love that. I think there will always be a space for HR. Technology can only do certain things. Even with the development of really complex technology like artificial intelligence, we can't replace people. I think HR will look very different and the future of it will look very different. But I think that's why it's important to stay curious and continue to learn so that we can evolve with the change. But absolutely not. I think there is definitely a future for HR, but I might be proved wrong. Let's see.